lines. I didn't fumble about it. I just went in and bam.
Is something wrong?
Is something wrong?
If you still think 227 was just a gentle, warm sitcom with nothing but laughs, then you've probably been remembering this show wrong for a very long time. That was only the most perfect disguise 227 ever had. Because for years, that outer shell buried almost everything truly strange hiding underneath. The people involved let the public remember the laughs, while the messier, stranger, more sensitive stuff got locked away behind the curtain. A creative direction weird enough to bend the whole series out of shape, clashes that were anything but smooth, and even secrets sitting right there on the screen that most viewers never noticed. In this video, we're going to dig up the 20 strangest, most unpredictable, and most worth uncovering facts about 227. Not the kind of trivia everybody already knows, but the kind of stories that only make this show look more complicated, more daring, and a whole lot more interesting than its sweet, well-behaved surface. Ready. Number 20. The weirdest Washington sitcom because it almost completely dodged politics. Anytime people bring up Washington, D.C., you probably think of the White House Congress power hallways, and those shows where everybody talks like America's fate is hanging on a midnight meeting. That's why I've always thought 227 felt a little strange in a really memorable way. The show is set in modern Washington, but it almost has no interest in telling government stories. What it cares about instead is one apartment building, a few windows, some front steps, neighbors watching each other all day, and the kind of back and forth only Golden Age sitcoms knew how to do this well. The original series ran on NBC from 1985 to 1990, and right from the start, it chose community life as its center instead of politics. But the part I love most goes one layer deeper than that. The television version of 227 is Washington, D.C., while Christine Houston's 227 came out of 1950s. Chicago, based on memories of Bronzeville, and the address 227 East 48th Street. NBC changed the original work quite a bit to turn it into a TV sitcom. And that is exactly where the weirdness of 227 really shows itself to me. It takes a city tied to national power, then tells stories about ordinary people, so familiar, they feel like home, almost like it wants to remind us that the real America does not live in meeting rooms, but right out in the hallway of an apartment building. And trust me, if the foundation of this show is already this unusual, what came after, it gets even stranger. Number 19. The creator of 227 walked away. Then Sandra almost swallowed the whole show. This is where 227 stops being just a sweet neighborhood sitcom. This is where it starts to smell like a real tug of war, very polite on the surface, but tense enough to make one of the people who created it walk right out the door. Michael G. Moy, who was credited under the pen name C.J. Banks, later said pretty plainly that he and Marla Gibbs did not see 227 the same way. Moy wanted a sitcom people could turn on to laugh and forget life for half an hour. Gibbs wanted the show to make room for real social issues. That is not some tiny disagreement. That is an argument about the soul of a sitcom. And can you believe it? Moy seems like he knew very early on. He said from the beginning he knew Jackée Harry would be the breakout star because the second Sandra walked into a scene, the whole energy of the frame changed. And honestly, he was not wrong. Some characters steal a line. Sandra almost stole the center of the whole series. The ironic part is that 227 really did end up walking that exact tightrope. There were moments when it wanted to say something serious about life, but the thing that kept viewers sitting there was often the back and forth between Mary and Sandra. Then, not long after that, Moy left and stepped into a completely different world with Married with Children. And trust me, when a show is already off balance in the writer's room, the weird stuff on screen is usually just getting started. Number 18. NBC promoted 227 with rap before America even knew what it was. These days, nobody even looks up when they hear rap in a commercial. But back in the middle of the 80s, a major network like NBC, using a rap-style pitch to sell a brand new sitcom, was enough to make people blink. And that is exactly what they did with 227. Before the audience really knew what this show even was, NBC put out a promo narrated in a rap style, like they were trying to say right away that this was not some dusty old TV product sitting on the couch, but something with its own rhythm, its own street energy, and a little of that bold new era knocking at the door. That is the kind of decision only American television from that time would come up with. A bunch of men in suits sitting in a meeting room watching popular culture change its beat outside, then trying to stuff that beat into a primetime promo. A little clumsy, a little reckless, but honestly more memorable than a whole lot of polished campaigns now. And if you think the weirdness of 227 was only in the way people sold it, not even close. At one point, the show itself almost stepped into a dark place smart sitcoms usually stay far away from. Number 177, 227. Almost went too far with a story about losing a child. When people remember 227, they remember the laughter bouncing off the front steps of that apartment building. They remember Mary Jenkins looking at somebody with exactly the kind of look that could make the audience laugh before she even opened her mouth. It is the kind of sitcom that makes you think of everyday rhythm neighbors and all those little ordinary things old American television used to do, as well as Sunday dinner. That is why this detail still sounds to me like somebody falling from upstairs onto a hardwood floor. At one point in Season 2, 227 considered a storyline where Mary gets pregnant, then gives birth to a stillborn baby. And no, that is not just a surprise twist anymore. That is a real wound. Marla Gibbs said the idea got thrown out because that ending was too tragic for a sitcom. I completely understand that choice. A sitcom can touch real-life money, stress family problems, unfairness, even homelessness, the way 227 sometimes did. But there is a line that once you cross it, the show is not itself anymore. The second you place the loss of a child in the middle of that apartment, you are no longer inviting the audience back to laugh. And that is the scariest part. Number 16. Sandra later stopped being the Sandra. She was at first. A lot of viewers remember Sandra Clark like she was right from the start. A whole storm of makeup men, swagger side eye, and one-liners that practically guaranteed a laugh half a second later. But if you go back to those early episodes, you will see a different Sandra. Still attractive, of course. Still fully aware of how attractive she is, no question. But she is also sharper, more controlled, more like a real woman than the later version most viewers carry around in their heads. Number 15. The woman behind 227 made history, and most people never knew it. That is the way American television has always tended to work, and it is also the thing that makes me love and hate that golden era at the same time. It puts the actors in the light, puts the characters into the country's memory, then quietly lets the person who built the whole world sink down to the end credits where most viewers never even look. With 227, that person was Christine Houston. She was the one who wrote 227, the play that laid the very first brick for this entire story. Without her, there would be no Mary Jenkins, no Sandra Clark, no apartment building generations of viewers remember as part of Saturday night television. What makes that even more worth talking about is that Christine Houston was described in the press as the first black woman, or at least one of the first, to get a created by credit for a primetime television show. And that is the part that makes me stop. Because 227 is usually remembered as this warm, charming sitcom full of laughs, but at a deeper level, it is also a real historical marker. Number 14. The first episode of 227 was not actually the first episode. The first episode is where everything starts. The pilot is the front door. That is what everybody thinks, but not with 227. The episode actually called Pilot aired as episode 6 on October 26, 1985. Put simply, viewers did not meet 227 in the order they think they did. They met a version that had already been rearranged. And the funny thing is, that is not even the strangest part. Some earlier aired episodes like The Refrigerator and Do You Love Me were actually filmed after the pilot to add characters and build out the setting. In other words, 227 did not debut with the first version of itself. It debuted with a version that had already been cleaned up, smoothed out, and made easier to step into. That is such a network television move. They do not just make a show and throw it on the air. They look at it again, fix it up, clear the path, then let the audience think everything happened in the right order from the beginning. Number 13. By season 5, 227 almost felt like a different show. Some series grow older in a really natural way. Others reach a point where they look in the mirror, decide to change clothes, change the way they walk, then just hope the audience still recognizes them. 227 was the second kind. If number 14 was about this show entering the screen through a side door, then this is where it almost pulled the old door right off the hinges. That turning point came in the episode For Sale at the end of season 4 when Rose sells the building. After that shift, season 5 feels like a different version of 227. The building structure changes the power inside, the building changes, new faces walk in, and the familiar rhythm viewers had lived with for years starts to slide off center. I have always thought that was one of those things that is both kind of funny and kind of sad about American television back then. When a show felt itself losing steam, it did not always admit it out loud. It would change the people, change the rooms, change the atmosphere, then hope the audience would accept it like it was still the same old home. Number 12. The credits do not tell the whole story about Marla Gibbs's power. There is something I only really understood when I got older, started watching old television more slowly, and began paying closer attention to the names rolling by at the end of the screen. Hollywood does not always show you the most powerful person in the easiest place to spot. A lot of times the best secret is sitting right where most viewers have already gotten up to grab a drink. With 227, that secret is Marla Gibbs. On paper, she did not always carry the title that would instantly tell you who was steering the ship. But the deeper I dug into the behind-the-scenes story, the clearer something became, and I kind of love this part. The credit line does not tell the whole story. Marla Gibbs's fingerprints do. She was not just standing in front of the camera as Mary Jenkins. She was deeply involved in who got to enter that world from the beginning. Jackée Harry, Hal Williams, Regina King, Helen Martin, Curtis Baldwin. That is no longer the story of an actor just worrying about her own job. That is the sign of somebody who knew exactly what face's rhythm and soul this show needed. Number 11. Mary Jenkins gives her birthday, but keeps her birth year under lock and key. There is an old rule, a beautiful one, and also a dangerous one if anybody forgets it. In an old American sitcom, a lady might tell you her birthday, but her birth year. You better not be foolish enough to ask. Mary Jenkins clearly belongs to that school. The show tells us her birthday is June 14th, but the second Lester starts drifting any further and almost lets the birth year slip out. Mary cuts him off immediately. Not one beat late, not one extra inch. Door slammed shut right there. What makes it funny is not the number on the calendar. It is the reaction, which is pure Mary. She will tell you just enough to stay polite, but she is never handing over the real goods locked in the safe. That is the very specific control classic female sitcom characters had. They did not need to raise their voices. They just had to cut somebody off at exactly the right moment, and the whole room understood where the line was. Number 10. The person who created 227 once hid behind a fake name. There is one thing viewers almost completely trust when they watch old shows, and that is the credits. If a name shows up, then that person must be behind the show. Sounds simple, clean, nice, and neat. But old Hollywood was never that innocent. With 227, there was already a tiny little secret sitting right there in the opening credits, and the more you dig into it, the more interesting it gets. The name C.J. Banks was actually the pen name of Michael G. Moye, one of the people who created this series. In other words, one of the people who built 227 did not want to use his real name on it. What makes that even better is that CJ came from the name of one of Moye's college drama professors. So, that fake name was not random at all. It feels more like a mask he picked very carefully. And that was American television back then. Some people tried to hide their fingerprints, but on the other side of that, some people left a very familiar mark right there on the screen, just waiting for somebody sharp enough to notice it. Number 9. Marla Gibbs. Brought a classic moment. From the Jeffersons into 227. This is the kind of detail that slips right past you if you are only half watching. But if you ever really lived with the Jeffersons, if you ever watched Marla Gibbs own the screen in that very specific way she had then, you notice it right away. In 227, Marla Gibbs almost repeats the same bell-ringing move she had done earlier in the Jeffersons. Just one little action, but for anybody who grew up with American television from that time, it feels like a secret door suddenly swinging open. The old memory comes rushing right back. Honestly, that is what makes rewatching old shows worth it. You are not just seeing one funny scene. You start seeing the threads connecting shows to each other, one era to another, one actor to their own legacy. 227 does not just have Marla Gibbs in it. It also carries the prettiest shadow of the old American television world she had already walked through. And this time, standing right beside her, was a man she believed was more right for the role than anybody else. Number 8. Hal Williams. Was Marla Gibbs's ideal TV husband. Some sitcom couples look like they are only standing next to each other because the cast needs a married pair. Then, there are other couples where the second they walk into a scene together, you believe they have a whole life behind the frame. Mary and Lester Jenkins were the second kind. And that was not an accident. Marla Gibbs said very clearly that unlike her time on the Jeffersons this time, she finally felt like she had the perfect man standing beside her on screen, and that man was Hal Williams. The good part is that Hal Williams was not some throwaway choice. He had already worked with Marla Gibbs on stage, so the two of them already knew each other, already trusted each other, and that meant when he stepped into 227, Lester Jenkins never felt like a husband who had just been plugged in to complete the family model. He felt like the kind of man who really could live with Mary, put up with Mary, argue with Mary, then still sit down with her in the same kitchen without making the audience feel anything fake. Number 7. Dylan McMillan. Was the only white character. White people usually get treated like the default and everything else gets added in later. 227 did the exact opposite. It did not build its world around a white point of view and then invite black characters in to round things out. It opened the door right from the start, like this apartment building, this rhythm of life, these gossip sessions, these meals, all of that already belonged to black people. In the named cast of the series, Barry Sobel as Dylan McMillan almost stands there like one rare white exception inside a world that was built with very clear intention. 227 did not ask permission to exist. It just showed up complete confident and moving to its own rhythm. Number 6. Regina King had to get through more than one. Casting round to enter 227. Some daughter roles in sitcoms get cast fast. As long as the girl is cute, does not look too out of place next to the parents, and the audience can accept her, that is usually enough. 227 did not do that with Brenda Jenkins. Regina King came into this show through a much more careful road, and that is what makes this casting story so good. This was Regina's first professional role, but Marla Gibbs did not look at her like some young face meant to fill space in the family. She looked at Regina and immediately saw something very important to old television. This girl standing next to Hal Williams really looked like his daughter. That whole idea that a family has to look like a family, people do not always care about that as much now, but the best years of American sitcoms absolutely did. Number 5. The opening of 227. Quietly upgraded the whole building. When you watch the opening, it is very easy to get the feeling that this apartment building sits right near the heart of Washington, D.C. So close, it feels like you could walk just a few minutes and be right at the biggest symbols of the Capitol. But the second you think about it a little harder, something starts to feel off. For the life Mary Lester and everybody in that building were living a location that good almost feels way too expensive. To put it plainly, if they really lived as close to those landmarks as the opening, makes you think the rent probably would have killed the whole building before the first episode even aired. And that is where television back then got a little sneaky. It knew viewers were not sitting there with a Washington map in their hands. All it needed was a few pretty shots, a few images in the right places, and people would believe it. Meanwhile, the address the show gives 227 Lexington Place does not really create that same right next to the National Mall feeling the opening suggests. Number 4. 227 had 2 actors who later won Emmys. Looking at 227, nobody would think this was the kind of show standing there just to brag that it had some powerhouse cast. It was an apartment building sitcom, neighbors, family, one person looking at another through the window and dropping exactly the kind of line that makes the audience laugh. That is why, looking back, this detail feels so good. Out of that one building came 2 women who both went on to the Emmys. Jackée Harry hit first. She won an Emmy in 1987 for playing Sandra Clark, and that was not just a great win for her. It was also the moment all of America had to admit that 227 did not just have charm, it had a real star. Then, on the other side of the story, there is Regina King. Back then, she was just Brenda, the teenage daughter in the Jenkins family, still very young, still standing in a big ensemble. But looking back now, you realize that apartment building was holding on to a talent that had not fully bloomed yet. Regina later won 3 more Emmys for other television roles. One woman lit up right there in front of the audience. The other one grew quietly, then, years later, showed the whole world just how incredible she really was. Number 3. 227. Aired at a time when a full black family was still rare on network TV. Do not think of 227 as just some cute neighborhood sitcom anymore. This is where you look a little closer and realize the show entered American television carrying more weight than its surface lets on. In 1985, The Washington Post said very plainly that 227 was a sitcom with a full black family, and that kind of show was still rare on network TV at the time. The article pushed it even further. Out of 19 new shows in the 1985 to 1986 fall season, only 2 were that kind of show. That number alone says a lot. 227 did not show up in a time when every door was already open. It came in when American television was still used to treating families like the Jenkinses as the exception instead of the norm. Number 2. The longer it went on, the more 227 became Sandra's show. This show was originally built around Marla Gibbs. Mary Jenkins was the center. She was the axis keeping that whole apartment building turning around her. But American television has one very strange rule, and a pretty cruel one too. The audience does not always love a show the way it was originally built to be loved. Sometimes they lock onto a different character, laugh harder at that person, wait for that person to appear, and little by little tie the whole memory of the show to that exact spot. With 227, that person was Sandra Clark. Jackée Harry was not just popular. She became the place where the laughter hit hardest. Every time Sandra walked into a scene, the air changed. The rhythm changed. The gravity of the whole room changed with her. And then, little by little, viewers stopped remembering 227 as Mary Jenkins's show. They remembered it as the show with Sandra. Jackie's Emmy did not come out of nowhere. The attempted spin-off pilot for Sandra did not come out of nowhere either. They were both signs that the true center of the show had already started shifting. Number 1, 227. Ended. When the thing viewers loved most was no longer intact. Some sitcoms do not die in one big fall. They do not crash in a burst of noise, and they do not disappear because of one sudden network decision. They reach the end in a much quieter way, and a much sadder way, too. One day, the audience turns on the TV and suddenly realizes that the thing they loved most in that show is no longer sitting where it used to be. That is exactly how 227 reached the end of the road. Yes, the show was canceled after season 5. Yes, the ratings had dropped. And yes, Jackée Harry was no longer sitting at the center, the way she was when viewers were waiting for Sandra to walk into a scene and light up the room. But if you leave it there, that is still too simple. The real problem was not just that fewer people were watching. The real problem was that by then, 227 had changed too much. It changed its rhythm, changed its atmosphere, changed its structure, changed that very specific feeling viewers used to come back for on weekend nights. That is the part that sticks with me the most. Once a show teaches the audience to love it in one certain way, then the moment the thing keeping them there starts to fade, all that is left is usually a countdown. Season 5 tried to swap people out, swap the world out, even change the way that building worked. But the harder 227 tried to keep itself alive. The more it revealed that it was moving away from the version viewers had opened their hearts to in the first place. Looking back carefully, 227 really was one of the legendary sitcoms of American television. But at the same time, it was also one of those shows packed with behind-the-scenes, trouble creative turns, and strange little details most viewers back then never even knew about. Now it is your turn. Which fact surprised you the most? And is there any detail about 227 that I did not mention, but you still remember really clearly? Leave it down in the comments, because sometimes the audience's memory is the most interesting archive of all. And if you want me to keep digging into another classic film or series, go ahead and suggest the next one right now. If you like looking back at old Hollywood this way, do not forget to subscribe to the channel.